Standing in the busy terminal, clutching my crumpled boarding pass, I watched my dad and stepsister Sarah strut toward the first-class line like they owned the airport. "She can't even afford economy," Dad announced loudly, making sure everyone nearby heard his contempt. Sarah's laughter rang out as she flashed her designer purse. My cheeks burned with humiliation as other passengers stared. I stayed silent, gripping my worn backpack tighter. Then footsteps approached, and a crisp voice said, "Miss Jacqueline Carter? Your private jet is ready for departure, ma'am." The entire platform froze. The shocked silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Dad's mouth hung open, his boarding pass dangling from his fingers. Sarah's designer bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the terminal. Other passengers turned to stare, whispers rippling through the crowd like wildfire. I looked up at the uniformed man standing before me. Captain Reynolds, according to his name tag, wore the crisp Navy uniform of Executive Aviation Services. His respectful demeanor was such a stark contrast to the treatment I had just endured that I almost didn't know how to respond. "There must be some mistake," Sarah sputtered, her voice rising an octave. She's with us. We're flying commercial." Captain Reynolds glanced at his tablet, then back at me with a professional smile. "No mistake, ma'am. Miss Carter, we're ready for your departure to Chicago whenever you are." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we all were, heading to the same destination for the same reason, yet somehow we were taking very different paths to get there. Grandmother's funeral had brought us all together at this airport, but it was about to separate us in ways none of us could have imagined. As I stood there, memories flooded back to 15 years ago when everything changed. I was 12 when Mom died in that car accident, and Dad was devastated. Within 18 months, he had married Patricia, a widow with her own daughter, Sarah. Patricia seemed like the answer to our prayers at first, a woman who could help Dad heal and give me the mother figure I desperately needed. But that's not how it worked out. From the moment Patricia and Sarah moved into our house, the dynamic shifted. Sarah was 2 years older than me, confident and beautiful, and everything seemed to revolve around her needs, her wants, her future. Dad, still grieving and trying to build a new life, began comparing us constantly. "Why can't you be more like Sarah?" became his favorite phrase. "Sarah gets straight A's. Sarah has so many friends. Sarah knows how to present herself." Sarah played into it perfectly. She would sweetly point out my shortcomings, always with a concerned expression that fooled Dad completely. "I'm just worried about Jacqueline," she would say. "She spends so much time alone with those computers. It's not healthy for a girl her age." Those computers became my escape. While Sarah got piano lessons, dance classes, and shopping trips with Patricia, I taught myself programming languages and web design. Dad saw it as antisocial behavior. I saw it as survival. High school made the differences even more apparent. Sarah attended the private academy across town, complete with designer uniforms and elite college prep courses. I went to the public school, working part, time at Murphy's Diner to pay for my own school supplies and clothes. "We can't afford 2 private school tuitions," Dad explained, though I noticed he never had trouble finding money for Sarah's extensive wardrobe or her summer trips to Europe with Patricia. College was where the real divide became obvious. Sarah got her full ride to Northwestern, paid for by Dad and Patricia, complete with a new car, furniture for her dorm, and a generous monthly allowance. I got a firm handshake and the suggestion that community college might be more realistic for someone like me. So, I worked. God, how I worked. 2 jobs during the day, classes at night, studying until 3 in the morning, surviving on coffee and determination. I cleaned offices, waited tables, tutored kids in math and computer skills, anything to scrape together tuition money and rent for my tiny studio apartment. The whole time, family gatherings were exercises in humiliation. Sarah would regale everyone with stories of her sorority life, her internships, her networking events. When asked about me, Dad would give a resigned shrug and say something like, "Jacqueline's still figuring things out. She's always been a bit slow to launch." Sarah would add her own commentary with false sympathy. "Oh, Jacqueline's doing her computer thing. It's sweet, really. She fixes laptops for the neighbors." They had no idea what I was actually building. Now, standing in this airport terminal, watching Captain Reynolds wait patiently for my response, I realized this moment had been 8 years in the making. Every sleepless night, every rude customer, every family gathering where I bit my tongue and smiled through their condescension had led to this. "Miss Carter?" Captain Reynolds prompted gently. "Shall we proceed to the aircraft?" Dad found his voice first. "Wait just a minute. There's obviously been some kind of confusion here. Jacqueline, what's going on?" For the first time in years, I looked my father directly in the eyes. The man who had raised me, loved me deeply when I was young, then slowly but surely made me feel like a disappointment and a burden. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to make sense of what was happening. "No confusion, Dad," I said quietly. "This is my flight." Sarah let out a nervous laugh, the kind she used when she was trying to regain control of a situation. "Your flight? Jacqueline? Private jets? Cost thousands of dollars. You work at that little computer repair shop downtown. This is ridiculous." That's when Captain Reynolds did something that changed everything. He looked at Sarah with the kind of professional courtesy you reserve for someone who clearly doesn't understand the situation and said, "Miss Carter is one of our most valued clients. We've had the pleasure of serving her for several months now." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sarah's face went through several different expressions, landing on something between confusion and panic. Dad just stared, his boarding pass still dangling from his hand like a forgotten thought. I shouldered my backpack, the same worn canvas bag I'd carried since college, and looked at my family one last time before following Captain Reynolds toward the private aviation terminal. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's voice rising in pitch as she started asking rapid-fire questions that no one could answer. As we walked away from the commercial terminal, I caught a glimpse of the departure board showing their first-class flight to Chicago, delayed by 30 minutes. Meanwhile, my jet was ready and waiting, engines warmed up, flight plan filed, crew prepared to depart at my convenience. The reversal felt surreal, like stepping through a mirror into a world where everything I had known was suddenly backwards. For 15 years, I had been the poor relation, the charity case, the one who couldn't quite get her life together. Now, with just a few words from Captain Reynolds, that entire narrative had crumbled. But the real shock was yet to come. As we approached the private terminal, I realized this was just the beginning of a conversation that was 15 years overdue. Walking through the private terminal felt like entering a different universe. Gone were the crowds, the chaos, the endless lines of frustrated travelers. Instead, there was calm efficiency, leather seating, and staff who moved with quiet purpose. Captain Reynolds led me past the exclusive lounge toward the departure area, and with each step, I felt the weight of 8 years of secrecy beginning to lift from my shoulders. "Your usual aircraft is ready, Miss Carter," he said, checking his tablet. "Flight time to Chicago will be approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes today. Weather looks clear all the way through." Your usual aircraft. The phrase would have been impossible to imagine just 3 years ago, back when I was still eating ramen noodles for dinner and wearing the same 3 outfits to work in rotation. But Captain Reynolds wasn't exaggerating. This had indeed become my usual way of traveling, a necessity born from the demands of a business that had grown far beyond anything I had ever dreamed possible. It all started in my cramped studio apartment 8 years ago, right after I graduated from community college with an associate degree in computer science and a debt load that made my stomach churn every time I thought about it. While Sarah was finishing her senior year at Northwestern, living in a sorority house that Dad lovingly called practically a mansion, I was coding websites for local restaurants and fixing laptops for $20 an hour. The breakthrough came through Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived in my apartment building. She had recently inherited her late husband's small accounting firm and was struggling to modernize their systems. "Everything's still on paper," she told me over coffee in her kitchen, surrounded by boxes of files and receipts. "My clients are going to other firms because they want digital access to their information, but I don't even know where to start." I spent 3 weeks developing a custom client management system for her, working every evening after my day job at the computer repair shop. It wasn't fancy, but it automated her invoicing, organized client files, and provided secure online access for her customers. She paid me $500 for the work, more money than I had ever made from a single project. 2 months later, she called me again. "Jacqueline, honey, I've got 3 other small business owners asking if you could do the same thing for them that you did for me. Word's getting around about how much easier you made everything. That's how Carter Digital Solutions was born, not with venture capital or a business plan, but with a folding table in my studio apartment and a determination to solve real problems for real people. The early days were grueling. I would work my regular job from 9 to 5, then come home and code until 2 or 3 in the morning, surviving on coffee and the kind of cheap frozen dinners that cost 99 cents each. Weekends were spent meeting with potential clients, usually small business owners who were drowning in paperwork and manual processes. I developed systems for everything: inventory management for the corner pharmacy, appointment scheduling for the local veterinarian, customer relationship tools for the family, owned insurance agency downtown. Each project taught me something new, and slowly, my reputation grew through word of mouth. The real turning point came in year 3, when I created an automated ordering system for Murphy's Diner, the same place where I had waited tables during high school. The owner, Tony Murphy, was spending hours every week manually placing orders with suppliers, tracking inventory by hand, and losing money on waste and over-ordering. My system integrated with his suppliers' databases, automatically tracked inventory levels, predicted demand based on historical data, and placed orders when supplies ran low. It saved him 15 hours a week and reduced his food costs by 30%. More importantly, it caught the attention of the Regional Restaurant Association. Within 6 months, I had 47 restaurants using variations of the same system. Within a year, it was 231. The money started flowing in faster than I could process it, but I kept living in the same studio apartment, kept wearing the same clothes, kept driving the same battered Toyota that barely passed inspection each year. My family had no idea what was happening. At Thanksgiving dinners, while Sarah would spend an hour detailing her latest promotion at the marketing firm where she worked, Dad would ask me about my computer hobby with the kind of patronizing tone you might use to discuss a child's finger painting. "Still doing the tech support thing?" he would ask, and I would nod and change the subject. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain that my computer hobby was generating more revenue in a month than Dad's struggling insurance agency made in a year? How could I describe the satisfaction of helping a family restaurant implement systems that saved them from bankruptcy, or watching a small medical practice finally get organized enough to expand to a second location? More than that, how could I trust them with my success when they had made it abundantly clear that they saw me as the family failure? The 4th year brought the biggest challenge yet. A client referred me to the regional director of a national chain who wanted to pilot my restaurant management system in 50 locations across 3 states. The project would require dedicated servers, round-the-clock, technical support, and a level of reliability that my apartment-based operation couldn't provide. I took out a business loan, rented office space, hired my first 2 employees, and spent 6 months without sleep, making sure the system could handle the increased demand. The pilot was so successful that the chain rolled it out to all 800 of their locations nationwide. That's when the acquisition offers started coming in. Technology companies, consulting firms, and enterprise software developers all wanted to buy Carter Digital Solutions. They saw what I had built, not just software, but an entire ecosystem of tools that could transform how small and medium businesses operated. My systems weren't just functional. They were intuitive, affordable, and designed by someone who understood what it was like to struggle with limited resources. I turned down the first dozen offers. This was my baby, my life's work, my proof that I was more than the family disappointment everyone believed me to be. But then Meridian Tech made an offer that changed everything. $47 million, with a 5-year consulting contract that would let me continue developing solutions for small businesses under their umbrella. The day I signed the papers, I sat in my studio apartment and tried to process what had just happened. After 8 years of 18-hour days, of choosing between groceries and gas money, of watching my family treat me like a charity case, I was suddenly wealthier than all of them combined. But wealth, I was learning, was more than just money in the bank. It was freedom. Freedom from the constant stress of making rent. Freedom from worrying about car repairs or medical bills. Freedom from having to smile politely while people who had never believed in me offered their unsolicited advice about my life. The private jet flights started 3 months later, when Meridian Tech needed me to visit client sites across the country. It was more efficient than commercial flights, they explained, and befitting someone of my new position as Senior Vice President of Small Business Solutions. The first time I walked onto a private aircraft, I thought about all those family dinners where Sarah would casually mention flying first class to vacation destinations, while I calculated whether I could afford a bus ticket home for Christmas. Now, following Captain Reynolds through the private terminal, I realized that the girl who used to fix computers for $20 an hour was gone. In her place was someone who had built an empire from nothing, who had turned years of rejection and dismissal into fuel for success that exceeded anything my family had ever imagined. The question now was what I was going to do with that success, and whether the family who had written me off as a failure was capable of seeing who I had really become. As Captain Reynolds guided me toward the departure gate, I could hear commotion erupting behind us in the main terminal. Sarah's voice carried across the space, rising in pitch and volume as she attempted to make sense of what she had just witnessed. "Excuse me, security, there's been some kind of mistake here. That woman is traveling with us, and she definitely doesn't have a private jet." I didn't turn around, but I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah, in her perfectly coordinated travel outfit and designer shoes, frantically waving her manicured hands as she tried to convince airport personnel that reality was somehow incorrect. Dad would be standing beside her, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion, probably pulling out his phone to start making calls. Captain Reynolds noticed my hesitation and gave me a reassuring smile. "Family dynamics can be complicated, Miss Carter. We see it more often than you might think. Sudden success has a way of revealing who people really are." His comment hit closer to home than he probably realized. Success hadn't changed me. It had simply removed the financial barriers that had forced me to accept my family's diminished view of my worth. Now, without the constant stress of survival, I could finally see our relationship clearly for what it had always been. Through the floor, too, ceiling windows of the private terminal, I watched Dad hurrying after a security officer, his boarding pass clutched in one hand and his phone pressed to his ear with the other. Even from this distance, I could read his body language, the aggressive posture of a man who was accustomed to getting his way through volume and persistence. Growing up, I had seen that same posture countless times. When the mechanic quoted a price Dad didn't like, when a teacher suggested Sarah might not be as gifted as he believed, when anyone dared to challenge his version of reality. Now he was deploying those same tactics to try to make sense of a situation that threatened everything he thought he knew about his own daughter. My phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then the calls started. Dad's name appeared on my screen, followed immediately by Sarah's. I let them go to voicemail and continued walking, but the messages kept coming. Through the glass wall separating the private terminal from the main concourse, I could see Sarah gesticulating wildly at a customer service representative, while Dad paced back and forth, his phone seemingly glued to his ear. "Your gate is just ahead," Captain Reynolds said, leading me past a quiet lounge area where a handful of other travelers sat reading newspapers and sipping coffee from actual china cups instead of paper containers. The contrast to the main terminal was striking. Where chaos and stress ruled there, here everything moved with calm efficiency. But my family's chaos was following me even into this sanctuary. My phone rang again, and this time I glanced at the screen to see not just Dad and Sarah's names, but numbers I didn't recognize. Word was spreading through our extended family network faster than I had expected. The first voicemail was from Dad, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Jacqueline, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to call me back immediately. There's obviously been some kind of mix up with your travel arrangements, and we need to sort this out before we miss our flight." The second was from Sarah, her tone oscillating between confusion and the kind of fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Jackie, honey, what's going on? The airport people are saying the strangest things about you having a private jet, which is obviously crazy, right? Call me back so we can figure out what happened here." But it was the third voicemail that really drove home how dramatically the family dynamic was about to shift. This one came from my Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother, who I hadn't heard from in over 2 years. "Jacqueline, your father called me in a panic saying something about you having money troubles and possibly being involved in some kind of scam. I just wanted to reach out and see if you need any help. Give me a call when you can. Money troubles. A scam. Even faced with evidence that contradicted everything they believed about me, their first instinct was to assume something was wrong with the evidence rather than wrong with their assumptions. I thought back to my high school graduation, 8 years ago, when Sarah had received a brand new BMW as a graduation gift while I got a $25 gift card to a gas station. It's more practical for someone in your situation, Dad had explained, as if my situation was some kind of permanent condition rather than a temporary financial constraint. Or my college graduation, when I had called to invite them to the ceremony only to be told that Sarah had a spa weekend planned with Patricia and it was too late to change the reservations. You understand, honey, Dad had said. Sarah's been looking forward to this for months. Every birthday where my gift was an afterthought purchased at the last minute. Every holiday where I was expected to be grateful for whatever leftover attention remained after Sarah's needs were met. Every family gathering where my accomplishments were minimized and my struggles were attributed to personal failings rather than systemic disadvantage. Now, watching Dad through the terminal window as he gestured aggressively at airport staff who were clearly trying to help him understand something he refused to accept, I realized that nothing had really changed. Faced with evidence of my success, his immediate response was still to assume I was somehow in the wrong. Captain Reynolds stopped at a comfortable seating area near our gate and turned to me with professional concern. Miss Carter, I don't want to intrude, but if you need a few minutes to handle family matters before we depart, that's perfectly fine. Your aircraft isn't going anywhere without you. I looked out the window again and saw that the situation in the main terminal was escalating. Sarah had apparently enlisted other passengers in her cause, gesticulating toward the private terminal, while a small crowd gathered to watch the drama unfold. A few people were holding up phones, probably taking videos of the scene that would end up on social media within minutes. Dad was now speaking to what appeared to be a supervisor, his face red with frustration as he pointed repeatedly toward the private aviation area. I could practically hear his words. That's my daughter. She's confused. She doesn't have money for a private jet. Someone needs to help her. The irony was overwhelming. Here was a man who had spent 8 years telling anyone who would listen that I couldn't manage my own life, couldn't make good decisions, couldn't achieve the kind of success that Sarah took for granted. Now, presented with concrete evidence that I had exceeded every measure of success he had ever used to judge me, his response was to assume I needed rescue. My phone rang again, this time showing Patricia's number. I almost laughed. My stepmother, who had spent 15 years treating me like an unwelcome houseguest in my own childhood home, was now reaching out. Undoubtedly, Dad had called her in his panic, and she was probably just as baffled as everyone else. Miss Carter? Captain Reynolds inquired gently. Shall we proceed to the aircraft? I stood up, shouldering my backpack and taking one last look through the window at my family's ongoing meltdown in the main terminal. Dad was now on the phone again, probably calling every relative he could think of to try to make sense of the situation. Sarah appeared to be arguing with a security guard who was clearly explaining airport protocols she didn't want to hear. Yes, I told Captain Reynolds. I'm ready to go. As we walked toward the jet, I realized this was more than just a departure. It was a declaration. For 8 years, I had allowed my family to define my worth, to set the terms of our relationship, to treat me as the family charity case who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention and affection they were willing to offer. But walking up the stairs to my private jet, I understood that those days were over. The balance of power had shifted completely, and it would never go back to what it was. The only question now was what I was going to do with that power, and whether my family was capable of adapting to a reality where I was no longer the person they could safely ignore. Stepping onto the aircraft felt like entering a different world entirely. The interior was appointed with cream, colored leather seats, polished wood accents, and the kind of attention to detail that whispered rather than shouted about luxury. But what struck me most was the warm greeting from the flight attendant who stood waiting by the door. Good afternoon, Miss Carter, Michelle said with a genuine smile. It's wonderful to have you back. I know you've been traveling extensively with the Meridian integration meetings. How was the presentation in Seattle last week? The question hit me with an unexpected wave of emotion. Here was someone who knew my professional life, who understood the weight of what I was carrying, who treated me with the respect and recognition I had been craving from my family for years. Michelle had been part of my regular flight crew for 6 months now, and in that time she had probably shown me more genuine interest and support than my father had in the past decade. "It went very well, thank you for asking," I replied, settling into my usual seat by the window. The client was enthusiastic about implementing our systems across all their locations. Captain Reynolds appeared in the doorway to the cockpit, his tablet in hand. "Miss Carter, we'll be ready for departure in just a few minutes. Same routing as your monthly Chicago trips? We'll have you on the ground at Midway in just over 2 hours." Monthly Chicago trips. The phrase hung in the air, and I realized that to my crew, my success wasn't a surprise or an anomaly. It was simply normal. They had watched me conduct business calls at 30,000 feet, had served me meals while I reviewed acquisition contracts, had witnessed the steady growth of my professional responsibilities over the past months. To them, I wasn't Jacqueline the charity case or Jacqueline the family disappointment. I was simply Miss Carter, a successful business executive who treated her crew with respect and paid her bills on time. Through the aircraft's large windows, I could see across the tarmac to the commercial terminal where my family was undoubtedly still creating a scene. The contrast was striking. Here I sat in climate, controlled comfort, being treated like the successful professional I had become, while they argued with airport security about something they couldn't begin to understand. Michelle approached with a selection of beverages. "Your usual sparkling water with lime, or would you prefer something else today?" "My usual." Again, that phrase that emphasized how completely my family had missed my transformation. They still saw me as the girl who wore thrift store clothes and ate ramen noodles, while the aviation crew had adapted months ago to serving someone who flew private jets as casually as most people took the bus. "Sparkling water would be perfect," I said, and as Michelle prepared my drink, I found myself thinking about all the conversations I'd had in this very seat, conference calls with Meridian executives, strategy sessions with my legal team, negotiations with clients who were implementing my systems in businesses across the country. My phone buzzed with yet another call from Dad, and this time I could see through the terminal windows that he was gesticulating wildly while pressing the phone to his ear. I could practically hear his side of the conversation. "She's not answering. Something's wrong. This can't be real." Michelle returned with my drink, and I noticed her glance toward my phone as it rang again. "Family?" she asked, with the kind of understanding tone that suggested she'd seen this dynamic before. "Something like that," I replied, declining the call and putting the phone on silent. "We see it occasionally," she said quietly. "Sudden wealth can be complicated for relationships. People don't always know how to adjust to new realities." Sudden wealth. If only it were that simple. This wasn't sudden at all. It had been 8 years in the making. What was sudden was my family's awareness of it, and their inability to reconcile this new information with the story they had been telling themselves about my life. Captain Reynolds' voice came through the intercom. "Miss Carter, we're ready for departure whenever you are. I do notice some activity in the main terminal that appears to be related to your party. Would you like me to delay takeoff for a few minutes?" I looked out the window again and saw that the situation had escalated further. Dad was now accompanied by what appeared to be an airport supervisor, and Sarah was pointing dramatically toward the private aviation area while a small crowd of onlookers watched the drama unfold. Security guards were maintaining a respectful but firm perimeter around the group, clearly explaining protocols that my family didn't want to accept. "No delay necessary, Captain Reynolds," I said into the intercom. "We can depart as scheduled." As the engines spooled up and we began to taxi away from the gate, I realized that my phone had been buzzing continuously with calls and text messages. The notifications were piling up from numbers I didn't recognize, relatives I hadn't heard from in years, family friends who had never shown much interest in my life before today. Word was spreading through our extended network faster than I had anticipated. In a family where Sarah's minor achievements were celebrated like national holidays, the news that quiet, unsuccessful Jacqueline had somehow acquired enough wealth to fly private jets was causing a complete meltdown of established social dynamics. I opened my text messages and found a series from my cousin Amy, Dad's niece, who I hadn't spoken to since her wedding 3 years ago. "Oh my God, is it true you have a private jet? Uncle David is freaking out, calling everyone." Sarah posted on Facebook that there's some kind of mix-up, but people are saying you're loaded now. Call me. I want to hear everything. Then there was a voicemail from my Aunt Ellen, my mother's sister, who had maintained sporadic contact over the years. Honey, I just got the strangest call from your father. He's saying something about airport confusion and you being in trouble? I told him that didn't sound right. You were always the smart one. Call me when you can, sweetie. I'd love to catch up. The smart one. It was fascinating how quickly the family narrative was beginning to shift now that money was involved. The same relatives who had watched Dad minimize my accomplishments for years were suddenly remembering that I had always been different or special in ways they hadn't appreciated before. But the most telling message came from Patricia, my stepmother, in a voicemail that dripped with the kind of false sweetness she typically reserved for people she needed something from. Jacqueline, darling, your father is very worried about you. There seems to be some confusion at the airport, and we just want to make sure you're safe. You know we all care about you so much. Please call us back so we can sort this all out together, as a family. As a family. The phrase was almost laughable, coming from a woman who had spent 15 years making it clear that I was an unwelcome reminder of Dad's first marriage, an obstacle to the perfect blended family she was trying to create with Sarah at its center. As we lifted off, and Chicago fell away below us, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with Marcus, my lawyer and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my success. He had warned me that this moment would come eventually, that wealth had a way of revealing itself despite efforts to keep it private. The question, he had said during one of our planning sessions, isn't whether your family will find out. It's what you'll do when they do, and whether you're prepared for how dramatically they'll change their behavior toward you. Marcus had grown up wealthy and understood the dynamics that money created in family relationships. He'd watched relatives emerge from nowhere when inheritance was involved, had seen siblings turn against each other over business opportunities, had witnessed the ugly transformation that occurred when people realized they had misjudged someone's financial situation. The hardest part, he had warned me, will be deciding whether their newfound interest in you is genuine affection or simple opportunism. And the truth is, it's probably a mixture of both, which makes it even more complicated to navigate. Now, sitting in my private jet while my family created chaos in the airport below, I understood what he had been trying to prepare me for. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, respect, and the fundamental question of who gets to define someone's worth. For 8 years, I had allowed my family to define my value based on external markers they understood. Job titles, salary ranges, material possessions. By those measures, I had been failing catastrophically, and they had treated me accordingly. But now, the markers had shifted, and suddenly I wasn't just equal to their expectations, I had exceeded them by orders of magnitude. The quiet, unsuccessful daughter was actually the most financially successful member of the family, and that reality was forcing everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew. The question was whether any of us were prepared for the conversation that was about to follow. By the time we reached cruising altitude, my phone had accumulated 43 missed calls and 67 text messages. I sat in the leather seat, watching the Midwest countryside pass below us at 800 miles per hour, while my family's panic spread through every branch of our extended network like a virus. The messages painted a picture of complete chaos. Sarah had apparently taken to social media to try to control the narrative, posting a series of increasingly frantic updates that only served to confirm what everyone was beginning to suspect. My cousin Danny screenshotted one of her Facebook posts and sent it to me. Having some confusion at the airport, but everything will be sorted out soon. Sometimes there are mix-ups with travel arrangements. Love my family. But the comments under her post told a different story. Family, friends, and distant relatives were asking pointed questions. Wait, Jacqueline has a private jet? I thought she was struggling financially? Sarah, what exactly is going on? Each new notification revealed another crack in the carefully constructed narrative my family had built around my supposed failure. Uncle Robert had apparently done some research and left me a voicemail that was completely different in tone from his first one. Jacqueline, honey, I just looked up Carter Digital Solutions online. I had no idea. Your father never mentioned. Well, we need to talk. I think there's been some serious miscommunication in this family. Serious miscommunication. That was certainly one way to describe 8 years of systematic dismissal and condescension. Marcus had been right about people emerging from nowhere when money was involved. I was getting messages from relatives I hadn't heard from since childhood, high school classmates who had never given me a second thought, and family friends who had been content to ignore me when I was perceived as the unsuccessful daughter. But the most revealing messages were coming from Dad himself. As the flight progressed, I could track his emotional journey through his increasingly desperate voicemails. First, confusion and frustration. "Jacqueline, this is ridiculous. You need to call me back immediately and explain what's happening. This airport situation is completely out of hand." Then, the beginning of realization. "Sweetheart, I tried to look up this Carter Digital Solutions company, and I'm seeing some things online that don't make sense. Can you please just call me back? I think we need to have a conversation." Finally, panic. "Jacqueline, please? I'm begging you to call me back. I don't understand what's happening, but I can see that I've missed something important. Please don't shut me out. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together. We can work through it together." The phrase would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. Where was this collaborative spirit when I was working 18-hour days to pay for community college? Where was this family solidarity when Sarah was getting college tuition and I was getting gas station gift cards? Michelle refilled my sparkling water and discreetly indicated the phone that had been buzzing constantly since takeoff. "Would you like me to ask the pilots to patch through any important calls? We can set up a secure line if you need to handle business during the flight." I appreciated her professionalism, but this wasn't business. This was something much more complicated and painful. "Thank you, but I think I need some quiet time to process all of this." She nodded with understanding and retreated, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing pile of digital evidence showing my family's complete meltdown. The text messages were becoming more creative as extended family members realized that traditional approaches weren't working. My cousin Lisa, who had barely acknowledged my existence at family gatherings, sent a message that was clearly crafted to appeal to my emotions. "Jacqueline, I just heard about your success. I'm so proud of you. I always knew you were special. We should get together soon and celebrate. I have some exciting business ideas I'd love to discuss with you." Business ideas. Of course. Within hours of learning about my wealth, relatives were already positioning themselves for potential partnerships and investment opportunities. But the message that hit hardest came from Patricia, my stepmother, in a text that revealed more about our family dynamic than she probably intended. "Jacqueline, we need to talk immediately. There are family financial matters that need to be discussed, and your father is very upset. This secrecy isn't healthy for our relationships. Families should be transparent with each other about these things." Transparency. The woman who had spent 15 years making decisions about family finances without including me in conversations was suddenly concerned about transparency. The same person who had orchestrated Sarah's private school education while suggesting that community college was more realistic for me was now advocating for open family communication about money. As we began our descent into Chicago, I realized that the dynamic I was returning to would be completely different from the one I had left just hours earlier. This morning, I had been the family member who needed help, support, and guidance from more successful relatives. Tonight, I would be landing as the most successful person in the family, and everyone would be recalibrating their relationship with me accordingly. My phone rang again, and this time it was Sarah calling from a number I didn't recognize. Probably Dad's phone, since she'd been trying to reach me unsuccessfully for hours. I almost answered, curious to hear how she would handle this new reality, but then I remembered every family gathering where she had casually mentioned her latest purchases, her vacation plans, her networking events, all while I sat quietly and absorbed the unspoken message that I wasn't worthy of the same lifestyle. Instead, I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message a few minutes later. "Jacqueline, this is Sarah. I'm using Dad's phone because you're not answering mine. Look, I don't know what's going on, but you're scaring everyone. We just want to understand. I know we haven't always been the closest, but family is family, right? We stick together. Please call me back so we can figure this out. Family is family. The same person who had spent years emphasizing the differences between us was now appealing to family solidarity. The step-sister who had never missed an opportunity to point out my shortcomings was suddenly interested in sticking together. But the most telling part of her message was the phrase, "We haven't always been the closest." It was such a sanitized way to describe years of systematic exclusion and condescension. We hadn't been distant. I had been deliberately marginalized while she was elevated to the center of family attention and resources. Captain Reynolds's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Carter, we're beginning our approach to Midway. Should be on the ground in about 15 minutes. Ground transportation is standing by whenever you're ready." Ground transportation. Another reminder of how completely my family had misunderstood my situation. While they had been assuming I couldn't afford economy airfare, I had been traveling with private jets and car services as part of my regular business routine. As Chicago's skyline came into view, I made a decision. This conversation with my family was inevitable, but it was going to happen on my terms, at my pace, with boundaries that I established. For 8 years, I had accepted their definition of my worth and their assessment of my potential. That era was ending today. The girl who had walked into that airport terminal this morning, clutching a crumpled boarding pass and enduring public humiliation about her financial situation, was gone. In her place was someone who had built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing, someone who had turned years of dismissal and rejection into fuel for extraordinary success. The question now was whether my family was capable of seeing that transformation, or whether they would simply recalibrate their manipulation to match my new financial status. Either way, I was about to find out. 2 hours later, I stood in the private lounge at Midway Airport, looking through floor 2, ceiling windows at the commercial terminal where my family would be arriving shortly. Their flight had been delayed by the chaos they'd created at the departure airport, giving me time to think, to plan, and to decide how I wanted to handle the conversation that was about to reshape our relationship forever. Marcus had arrived on an earlier commercial flight and was sitting across from me, reviewing legal documents that had nothing to do with family drama, but everything to do with protecting what I had built. He looked up from his laptop as my phone buzzed with yet another call from Dad. "You know you're going to have to talk to them eventually," he said, with the kind of gentle directness that had made him not just my lawyer, but one of my most trusted advisors. "I know," I replied, watching their flight information update on the arrivals board. "I'm just trying to decide what I want to accomplish in that conversation." "What do you mean?" I turned away from the window and faced him. For 8 years, every interaction with my family has been about me trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I had none. I'm tired of being defensive. I'm tired of justifying my choices to people who never supported them. I'm tired of pretending their opinion of me matters. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "But if you shut them out completely, you'll always wonder what might have been possible. And, based on what you've told me about your father, some of his behavior might have been grief-driven rather than malicious." He was right, of course. Dad's transformation from loving father to distant critic had begun after Mom's death, and there was a part of me that wondered whether his subsequent behavior had been more about his own pain than about any genuine assessment of my character. But that didn't excuse 15 years of systematic diminishment, and it certainly didn't excuse the public humiliation I had endured that morning. My phone rang again, and this time I answered it. "Jacqueline." Dad's voice was strained with relief and desperation. "Thank God you answered. Where are you? We just landed, and we need to see you immediately. There's been some kind of terrible misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Dad," I said calmly. "I'm in the private aviation lounge. If you'd like to talk, you and Sarah can meet me here. I'll arrange for an escort to bring you through security." There was a long pause. "Private aviation lounge? Jacqueline, what the hell is going on? You're scaring me." For the first time in years, I heard genuine vulnerability in his voice. Not anger, not frustration, not condescension, just fear and confusion from a man who was realizing that everything he thought he knew about his daughter might be wrong. "I'll explain everything when you get here," I said. "But Dad, this conversation happens on my terms, in my space, when I'm ready to have it. If you can't accept that, then we don't have anything to discuss." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, sweetheart. Whatever you need." 20 minutes later, Airport security escorted Dad and Sarah through the private terminal to the executive lounge where Marcus and I were waiting. Watching them walk through the space, taking in the leather furniture, the attentive service, the quiet efficiency that marked this as a place designed for people with serious money, I could see the reality of my situation beginning to sink in. Sarah looked smaller somehow, her designer outfit and confident demeanor diminished by an environment that made her material possessions seem ordinary rather than impressive. Dad appeared genuinely shaken, his usual bluster replaced by the kind of uncertainty I hadn't seen from him since Mom's funeral. They sat down across from Marcus and me, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence stretched until Sarah couldn't contain herself anymore. "Jacqueline, what the hell is going on? People are posting things online about you being some kind of millionaire tech executive, and I don't understand how that's possible." I looked at my stepsister, this woman who had spent years casually mentioning her salary, her investment accounts, her real estate purchases, always with the unspoken implication that I should be impressed by her success. Now she sat across from me in a lounge that cost more per hour than most people made in a day, asking how my success was possible. "It's possible," I said quietly, "because for 8 years while you were spending Dad's money and complaining about your entry-level marketing job, I was building a business. While you were posting vacation photos from Europe, I was working 18-hour days to develop software that would change how thousands of businesses operate. While you were living off trust funds, I was creating value that major corporations were willing to pay $47 million to acquire." The numbers hung in the air like a physical presence. $47 million. More money than our entire extended family had ever seen combined. Dad found his voice first. $47 million? Jacqueline, how is that even possible? You fix computers. "I fixed computers when I was 19 years old and desperate for rent money," I replied. "Then I started developing custom business software. Then I built those solutions into a comprehensive platform that revolutionized how small and medium businesses manage their operations. Carter Digital Solutions served over 3,000 clients across 42 states before Meridian Tech acquired us 3 months ago." Sarah's face had gone pale. "3 months ago? This whole time? You've been sitting at family dinners letting us think you were struggling?" "I was letting you think what you wanted to think," I corrected. "Every time someone asked about my work, I answered honestly. I told you I was developing business software. I told you I was working with restaurants and medical practices and retail stores. You heard computer fixing because that's all you were capable of understanding." Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Jacqueline, sweetheart, I had no idea. If I had known." "You would have what?" I interrupted. "Treated me differently? Been proud of me instead of embarrassed? Included me in family conversations instead of treating me like the charity case who should be grateful for whatever attention you were willing to spare?" The pain in his face was genuine, and I felt a flicker of the old impulse to comfort him, to minimize my hurt, to spare his feelings. But Marcus had prepared me for this moment, had helped me understand that protecting other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being was exactly the pattern I needed to break. "I lost your mother," Dad said quietly, "and I didn't know how to be a father to a daughter who reminded me so much of her. You were brilliant like she was, independent like she was, and every time I looked at you, I saw what I'd lost. It was easier to focus on Sarah because she didn't carry those memories." It was the first honest thing he had said to me in 15 years, and it explained more about our relationship than any other conversation we'd ever had. But understanding the source of his behavior didn't erase the consequences of it. "That's not my fault," I said, feeling tears threatening for the first time that day. "I lost her too, and I needed you to be my father, not someone who was trying to avoid painful memories. I needed you to see me, to support me, to believe in me. Instead, you spent 15 years making me feel like I was a disappointment and a burden." Sarah spoke up, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "Jacqueline, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you felt that way," I thought. "I thought we were just different, that you preferred being on your own." I looked at my stepsister, this woman who had benefited from every advantage I had been denied, and tried to find words for the complex emotions I felt toward her. She wasn't evil, just privileged and oblivious, raised in an environment where her needs and wants took priority over everyone else's. You didn't prefer anything, I said. You created a family dynamic where I was consistently excluded, overlooked, and minimized. You celebrated your achievements loudly while dismissing mine quietly. You made assumptions about my capabilities and my potential based on external markers that had nothing to do with my actual talent or effort. The lounge had gone completely quiet around us, other travelers instinctively giving our family group the privacy this conversation required. Through the windows, I could see the sun beginning to set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades that reminded me of better times, when family meant safety and support rather than judgment and rejection. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Jacqueline, if I may, have you given thought to what you want your relationship with your family to look like going forward? It was the question I had been avoiding, the decision that would define not just my relationship with Dad and Sarah, but my understanding of forgiveness, family, and what it meant to move forward from deep hurt. I pulled out the legal documents Marcus had prepared weeks earlier, the papers I had been carrying in my briefcase like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment to use them. I've been planning to help you, I said, sliding the documents across the table. Both of you. Dad, I know your insurance agency is struggling. Sarah, I know your trust fund is nearly depleted, and you're carrying more credit card debt than you can manage. I've been debating for months whether to step in and stabilize your finances. They stared at the paper's detailed financial analyses, proposed assistance packages, legal frameworks that would have solved their problems completely. But help isn't the same as relationship, I continued. I can write checks to cover your debts, fund your business recovery, set up investment accounts that will provide long-term security. What I can't do is pretend that money erases the past 8 years of emotional damage. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'll give you each a one-time gift sufficient to resolve your immediate financial problems. Consider it my way of evening out the advantages Sarah received growing up. But our relationship going forward will be different. I'm not the family failure anymore, and I'm not the person you can safely ignore or dismiss. If you want to be part of my life, you need to treat me with the same respect you'd show any successful person you wanted to maintain a relationship with. Sarah was crying now, quiet tears that probably represented the first genuine remorse she had ever felt about our family dynamic. Jacqueline, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to be this way. Intent doesn't matter as much as impact, I replied, but acknowledgement is a starting point. I stood up, signaling that this conversation was ending. Dad, I'll have my financial advisor contact you next week about restructuring your business debt. Sarah, your credit issues will be resolved by the end of the month. After that, if you want a relationship with me, you'll need to earn it the same way you'd earn any other relationship through respect, genuine interest, and reciprocal support. Dad stood too, reaching toward me with uncertainty. Jacqueline, I love you. I've always loved you. I didn't know how to show it after your mother died. I hugged him, briefly, feeling the weight of 15 years of complicated emotion. I love you too, Dad. But love without respect isn't enough anymore. I hope you can understand that. As I walked away from the lounge, leaving my family to process the conversation we had just had, I realized that this wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. For the first time in my adult life, I was defining the terms of my relationships based on my own worth rather than other people's assessments of my value. Whether my family would be able to meet me on those terms remained to be seen, but either way, I was finally free to find out. 6 months later, I sat in Grandmother's favorite restaurant in downtown Chicago, the same place where our family had gathered for celebrations as far back as I could remember. But this gathering was different. The dynamic that had defined our relationships for 15 years was gone, replaced by something more honest, more balanced, and infinitely more respectful. Dad arrived first, as he always did, but instead of the stressed, overwhelmed man I had grown accustomed to seeing, he looked rested and confident. The restructuring of his insurance agency, funded by my intervention but executed entirely through his own efforts, had not only solved his financial problems, but reminded him why he had loved building a business in the first place. You look good, Dad, I said as he sat down across from me, and I meant it. There was a lightness to his demeanor that I hadn't seen since before Mom died. "I feel good," he replied, and then did something that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. He asked about my life without any underlying assumptions about what he would hear. "How did the conference in Seattle go? Marcus mentioned you were keynoting at some kind of technology summit." 6 months ago. He wouldn't have known I attended conferences, wouldn't have been in contact with Marcus, and certainly wouldn't have understood that someone like me could be important enough to keynote industry events. The transformation in how he saw me was complete and genuine. "It went very well," I said. "We announced the launch of our Small Business Accelerator program. We're using the acquisition money to fund grants and technical support for women entrepreneurs who are building technology solutions." His face lit up with genuine pride. "That's incredible, sweetheart. Your mother would have been so proud of what you've built." It was the first time he had mentioned Mom in connection with my accomplishments, and it hit me harder than I had expected. For years, I had assumed his distance from me was about disappointment. Learning that it was actually about grief, his inability to see me without remembering what he had lost, hadn't excused his behavior, but it had helped me understand it. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, but she too was transformed. The designer clothes and carefully styled appearance had been replaced by scrubs and comfortable shoes. She looked tired in the way that comes from meaningful work, rather than existential dissatisfaction. "Sorry I'm late," she said, hugging both Dad and me before sitting down. "We had a patient come in right at shift change, and I couldn't leave until we got her stabilized." The nursing program had been Sarah's idea, funded by my gift but pursued entirely through her own commitment to finding work that felt valuable rather than simply prestigious. Watching her talk about her patients, seeing the genuine satisfaction she got from helping people who were vulnerable and scared, I realized that the person I had resented for so many years had simply been as trapped in our family's dysfunction as I was. "How's the program going?" I asked, and listened as she described the challenges and rewards of starting a healthcare career in her 30s. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," she admitted, "but it's also the first time I felt like what I was doing actually mattered, you know what I mean?" I did know what she meant. Building Carter Digital Solutions had been difficult in ways that went far beyond the financial struggles or the 18-hour workdays. It had required me to believe in my own value when everyone around me suggested I had none, to persist through failures and setbacks without the support system that most people took for granted. Our conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice calling my name. I turned to see Tony Murphy, the owner of the diner where I had worked during high school, approaching our table with a huge smile. "Jacqueline Carter, I've been hoping to run into you. I wanted to thank you again for what your system did for my business. We just opened our 3rd location, and I never could have managed the inventory and staffing coordination without the software you developed." Dad and Sarah listened as Tony described how my automation platform had transformed his operations, reduced his costs, and enabled the expansion that had been his dream for 20 years. When he left, promising to stay in touch, there was a moment of silence at our table. "I had no idea," Sarah said quietly. "All those times I teased you about your computer hobby, you were actually changing people's lives." "I tried to tell you," I replied, but without the bitterness that comment would have carried 6 months earlier. The problem wasn't that I was unclear about what I was doing. The problem was that you weren't capable of hearing it. Dad nodded slowly. "We saw what we expected to see instead of what was actually there. That's on us, not on you." The acknowledgement meant more than any apology could have. It represented a fundamental shift in how they understood our family history, accepting responsibility for their role in dynamics that had hurt all of us in different ways. As our dinner progressed, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. The humiliation at the airport had been a catalyst, but the real transformation had happened in the months that followed, as each of us learned to see ourselves and each other more clearly. Dad had rediscovered his passion for business and his pride in being my father. Sarah had found work that gave her life meaning beyond material accumulation. And I had learned that success meant nothing if it wasn't built on a foundation of self-respect and healthy relationships. "There's something I want to tell you both," I said as we finished our meal. "Next month, I'm endowing a scholarship program at the community college where I studied. It's for students who are working multiple jobs to pay their way through school, students who don't have family financial support but who have the determination to build something better for themselves. I paused, looking at both of them. I'm naming it the Janet Carter Memorial Scholarship, after Mom. Not because she would have wanted her name on a building, but because she would have understood what it meant to believe in someone's potential when others couldn't see it. Dad's eyes filled with tears. She would have loved that, and she would have been so proud of the woman you've become. I think she would have been proud of all of us, I said, for finally figuring out how to be a family. As we walked out of the restaurant together, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. Success isn't just about financial achievement or professional recognition. It's about building a life where you can maintain your integrity, respect your own worth, and create relationships based on mutual support rather than power imbalances. Forgiveness doesn't require accepting unacceptable behavior. It requires creating boundaries that protect your well-being while leaving room for people to grow and change. Family isn't about accepting whatever treatment people are willing to offer. It's about creating connections based on genuine care and reciprocal respect. Most importantly, I had learned that the validation I had spent years seeking from others was something I needed to give myself. No amount of external success would have meant anything if I hadn't first believed I deserved it. The girl who had stood in that airport terminal 6 months earlier, enduring public humiliation about her financial situation, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her own value, who had built something meaningful from nothing, and who refused to accept relationships that diminished her worth. Sometimes the family that underestimates you the most desperately needs the success you're building. But healing family relationships requires both forgiveness and firm boundaries. Love without self-respect helps no one, and respect without accountability changes nothing. The airport confrontation had been the worst day of my life and the beginning of the best transformation. Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought you wanted from people to discover what you actually need from them. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and strong enough to maintain your boundaries while leaving room for growth, you might be surprised by people's capacity to become better versions of themselves. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where your family's perception of your success was completely different from your reality? How did you handle the challenge of maintaining relationships with people who didn't initially believe in your potential? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with similar family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help more people find it. These kinds of family situations are more common than we like to admit, and sometimes hearing someone else's story can provide the courage to set necessary boundaries in our own lives. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about real people overcoming difficult family situations and finding their own path to success. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this message about self-worth and family boundaries, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to believe in your own potential, even when the people closest to you struggle to see it. Sometimes the most important validation is the kind you give yourself, and sometimes the best family relationships are the ones you rebuild on foundations of mutual respect and genuine care. Remember, you're worth more than other people's limited perception of your potential. Keep building, keep growing, and keep believing in yourself, even when others can't see your vision yet. The success you create might surprise everyone, including yourself.